Hi everyone, I'm Esther. In this video, I'm going to introduce the present perfect tense. This tense can be used to talk about an action that happened in the past, but when it happened is not very important or it's unknown. It can also be used to talk about an action that started in the past and continues in the present. We really want to emphasize how long the action has been happening. And finally, we use this tense to talk about a recent action. There's a lot to learn and a lot of important information, so keep watching. Let's talk about one usage of the present perfect tense. This tense can be used to talk about an action that happened in the past, but when it happened is not important or not known. However, this action is important to the conversation right now. Let's take a look at some examples. The first one says, I have been to Canada. What we do here is we start with the subject, I. For I, you, we, and they, we follow with have. After that, we use the past participle of the verb. In this case, the verb is be, and so the past participle is been. I have been to Canada. The next sentence says, my cousins have seen the movie. My cousins is a they, and so again, we follow with have. And the past participle of see is seen. They have seen the movie, or my cousins have seen the movie. The next example says, Chad has gone home. Chad is a he. For he, she, it, we follow with has. Then, the past participle gone is for the verb go. Chad has gone home. And finally, my phone has been fixed. My phone is an it. Therefore, I use has. And then I need the past participle of be, been. My phone has been fixed. Let's move on to the next usage. The present perfect tense is also used to describe an action that started in the past and continues in the present. For and since are common expressions used with the present perfect tense. Let's take a look at these examples. I have worked there since 2002. You'll notice we start with the subject. If it's I, you, or we have. Then the past participle of the verb, in this case, worked. What you'll notice here is that we also have since 2002. This shows when the action started. So with the expression since, you need to use a specific point in time. The next example does the same thing. You have had a car since last year. Again, we use since, so we have a specific point in time, last year. Take a look at the next example. Anna has liked him for weeks. In this case, the subject is Anna, which is a she, and so we use has, then the past participle liked. However, at the end of this sentence, we see for weeks, not since weeks. When we use for, we talk about the duration. We explain how long this action has been true. And finally, we have eaten lunch here for 3 months. Again, the sentence ends with for 3 months, so we show the duration. Let's move on to the next usage. In addition, the present perfect tense can be used to describe an action that recently stopped. Let's take a look at some examples. I have just been to the doctor. So just like for all the other usages, we start with the subject, have or has, and the past participle. But you'll notice here I use the word just between have and the verb. I have just been to the doctor. This shows that it happened very recently. The next example says, James has just seen his new baby. Again, just goes in between have or has and the verb. Take a look at the next example. It says she has already been to China. Already is another word you can use to show that this action recently happened. However, already can also be moved to the end of the sentence. So it's perfectly fine to say she has been to China already. And in the last example, we have recently visited Tom. Again, you can put this word between have or has and the verb, or you can also put it at the end of the sentence. We have visited Tom recently. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the negative form of the present perfect tense. Here are some examples. The first one says, I have not been to Europe. What you'll notice in the first sentence is that we simply put a not between have and been. I have not been to Europe. You can also use a contraction and say, I haven't been to Europe. The next sentence says, it has not rained for 3 months. Again, we put the not between the has and the verb. It has not rained for 3 months. Here, we have a time expression to show the duration. The next example says, Teddy hasn't driven for 2 years. We use the contraction here for has and not, hasn't. And then we use the time expression for 2 years at the end of the sentence. And finally, the last sentence says, my sons haven't played soccer since 2010. We see another contraction here for have not, haven't. My sons haven't played soccer since 2010. This time expression uses since, and so we mention a specific point in time. Let's move on. Now, let's take a look at the have or has question form for the present perfect tense. Take a look at the board. The first sentence says, Mike has eaten lunch. That is a statement. Now to turn it into a question, it's quite easy. All you have to do is put has at the beginning. Then you follow with the subject and then the past participle. You'll notice that the placement of the past participle doesn't change. We've simply changed the order of the first 2 words. Has Mike eaten lunch? Has Mike eaten lunch? And you can answer by saying, yes, he has, or no, he hasn't. The next sentence says, they have watched the video. This is a statement. If we want to turn it into a question, again, we change the order of the first 2 words. Have they? And the past participle verb stays in the same place. Have they watched the video? Have they watched the video? You can answer this question by saying, yes, they have, or no, they haven't. Good job, guys. Let's move on. Now, I'll briefly introduce how to ask WH questions in the present perfect tense. Take a look at the board. I have where, what, who, and how. These go at the beginning of the question. Let's take a look at the first example. Where has Tim been? You'll notice we follow the WH word with has or have. In this case, I use has because the subject is Tim, and Tim is a he. And then we followed that with the past participle of the verb. Where has Tim been? And I can answer by saying Tim has been home, or Tim has been on vacation, something like that. The next question says, what countries have you visited? I can answer by saying, I have visited China, or I have visited Mexico. You can also use the contraction I've visited China. The next question says, who has she talked to? You can answer by saying, she has talked to her mom, or she has talked to her teacher. The next question says, how long have you been married? I've been married for 3 years. That's one answer that you can give. Great job, everybody. Let's move on. For this checkup, we'll take a look at the present perfect tense. which describes an action that happened at an unknown or indefinite time in the past. Let's look at the first sentence. She blank read that book. The subject in this sentence is she. For he, she, it, in this tense, we say has. She has. Now, take a look at the verb. It looks like read, but remember, we need to use the past participle of the verb, so it's actually read. Read and read are spelled the same. She has read that book. The second sentence says, they blank visit China. Visit is the verb that you want to use here. For I, you, we, and they, we use have, not has. They have. Now, what's the past participle of visit? The answer is visited. They have visited China. Next, we blank see that concert. Again, for I, you, we, and they, we use have. We have. Now, the past participle of see is seen. We have seen that concert. Now, let's look for the mistake in the next sentence. Rick have been to Cuba. Take a look at the subject. Rick. Rick is a he. So, instead of have, we need to change this to has. Rick has been to Cuba. Sally and I hasn't finished work. The subject in this sentence is Sally and I. The pronoun for that is we. We hasn't finished work? That still sounds weird, right? We have to change this to have not, or the contraction haven't. And finally, I did go to the doctor. Now this sentence makes sense, but it's not the present perfect tense. We have to change it. Remember, we use have for the subject I. But we're not done. What is the past participle of go? It is gone. I have gone to the doctor. Great job. Let's move on to the next checkup. In this checkup, we'll talk about the present perfect tense and how it can be used to describe an action that started in the past and is still true today. The first sentence says, I blank known Carly since 1994. The subject is I, and we already have the past participle of the verb know, which is known. What are we missing? The correct answer is have. For I, you, we, and they, we use have after the subject. The next sentence says, he has been here blank 2 p.m. Now, the first part is all there. He has been. However, remember that for the present perfect tense, we use for or since to talk about how long that action has been true. In this case, we use since because 2 p.m. is a specific period in time. Next, it says she blank liked Tom since June. The subject is she, and we have the past participle of the verb like, which is liked. What are we missing? Again, we need have or has. Because the subject is she, can you figure out which one you need? The correct answer is has. She has liked Tom since June. Now, I want you to find the mistake in the next sentence. I have worked here 6 months ago. Can you find the mistake here? I have worked. That's correct. However, in the present perfect tense, we don't use ago. This is talking about more the past. We want to talk about since or for instead. Now, 6 months is not a specific time, so we don't use since. Instead, we talk about the duration, so we need for. We'll say, I have worked here for 6 months. Let's take a look at the next sentence. Jen have a cold for 2 weeks. At first glance, this doesn't seem that wrong, but remember, Jen is a she, so we need has. Jen has. But wait a minute, Jen has have a cold? That's not right either. We need the past participle of have. What is the past participle? The correct answer is had. Jen has had a cold for 2 weeks. And finally, we haven't went home since Friday. This one is a little tricky. The subject is we. We have not. That's correct. The contraction is haven't. We haven't. Now, the problem is we have this verb went. That's in the past simple tense. We need the past participle of go. The correct answer is gone. We haven't gone home since Friday. Good job, guys. Let's move on to the next checkup. In this checkup, we'll take a look at the present perfect tense and how it is used to describe an action that finished recently. We'll be focusing on the words just, already, and recently to show this. Let's take a look at the first sentence. She has just blank that book, and we're using the verb read. Remember, we take the subject she, and for he, she, and it, we say has. So that's correct. Now we need the past participle of read, and that is read. She has just read that book. You'll notice I use the word just right before the past participle. Next, it says they have already, and the verb is wake up. If the subject is he, she, or it, we use has. But if the subject is I, you, we, or they, we use have. So that's correct. They have. Also, we have the word already here to show that it happened recently or that it finished recently. Now the verb is wake up. We need the past participle of wake up, and that is woken up. So the answer is they have already woken up. The next sentence says, we have recently blank work, and the verb is finish. We have, that's correct, and we have the word recently to show when the action finished. Now we need to find the past participle of the verb finish. The correct answer is we have recently finished work. Now, try to find the mistake in the next sentence. Morty has eaten just. This sounds a little strange, right? That's because just needs to come before the verb. Therefore, the answer is Morty has just eaten. The next sentence says, Karen has recently been sick. Karen is a she, so has is correct. And there we have recently. Now we need the past participle of the verb. Be is our verb, and the past participle of be is been. Karen has recently been sick. And finally, I have gone already to the dentist. This is similar to another question we looked at just before. I have gone already to the dentist. The placement of already is a little awkward. So we can say, I have already gone. So we can put already before the verb, I have already gone to the dentist. Or we can put this at the end. I have gone to the dentist already. Both of those are correct. Now, good job. That is the end of the checkup. Let's move on. Excellent job, everyone. You just learned about the present perfect tense. There was a lot to learn, but you did a wonderful job. Keep studying English. I know that it's hard, but you will get better with time, effort, and practice. I'll see you in the next video.